Hey, everybody.
Rabbi.
How's everybody doing?
Okay,
Hello.
Oh,
I'm
hey,
good.
very good. Good to have you. Greetings from Denver, Colorado.
Oh, wow. Is it snowy? Is it snowy?
Uh, I mean, there's like a little bit left from
Yeah,
a recent snowfall, but I mean, it's chilly. I don't know, it's around
yeah.
40.
Well, it's, I think it's colder here, right?
It is colder. It's in the 20s here.
Yeah, it's quite cold. So,
Yeah.
yeah, well, enjoy. Richard, just quickly, do you get information from the synagogue, like the new news or something like?
Yes.
Okay, good, because this weekend we're expecting a snowstorm. And
Hmm.
so Laura said to stay tuned. What's going to
Well,
happen?
I can walk, but it doesn't do me any good to walk if
If
I'm the
we're
only one that
not
can get there.
there, right?
Right. Right.
That's right.
Yeah. Is it, are you expecting, like accumulation of a certain amount, or is it or is it more
They
like sort of ice
they said it was too early at this point, but it's going to be Friday and Saturday, and it's going to be snow, or it could be ice, or it could be a mixture of snow, ice, and sleet. It's like
right?
cover your bases.
And when you're generally not equipped to deal with those, when it's a region not generally equipped to deal with those things, it can be really treacherous, especially given how just hilly
Yeah, the
everything is.
topography.
I mean, the parking lot. Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah, we just shut down when, when it gets bad like that.
Okay, so
Yeah,
hopefully a nice Zoom service, and
right,
it can do what you need to do. So,
right.
all right, well, it's great.
Yeah.
Power's a
Um,
And say,
problem.
say hello to your mom, Rabbi.
I will,
Okay,
absolutely. Yeah, she's doing okay.
good, good. I'm glad. So,
Will, you wanted to say something?
Yeah, the power's the only thing you need to worry about. But it's been years since we lost powers. I can't remember. It was when we were still living in Knox County. So it's been years. But also our one time I've got a propane heater and
Mm.
I've got camping stuff, propane stove. So we won't starve. We won't freeze. May all be in the living room, but we survive.
Sure. All right, well, great. Well, listen, last week's gathering was sort of like a conversation at 30,000 feet. It's sort of like an overall idea of what halacha is and what it can be. So, if anyone has any leftover questions or thoughts about that, I'm happy to entertain those. If not, we can go back to where we were.
Okay.
So,
Well, since of this forecast, just in case of emergency, and you have problems, you put me on co-host. Will it something pop up and somebody wants on if it's not you? Because I'm still not sure what happens when that happens.
oh yeah, if we get kicked off, I mean, hopefully we'll be okay here. But yeah, no, I'll do that. Yeah, just sort of like look to it'll like drop down on the screen if we're coming back or something like that. But I shouldn't. But because I have the host status to begin with, it should just let me in.
Right, but if you're not there and somebody else wants in, do I get some kind of pop-up says
Yes,
admit them
yes.
or something or what?
And it'll say whatever their name is, and however they identify themselves on Zoom, and then I'd say that, look, I mean, I think you're pretty okay letting anybody in who has the password, and then if it's somebody that we should not have let in, which I think is pretty rare, but should that happen, I can always kick them off later.
But
So.
I can kick them off if you're not back yet, right? There'll be
Well,
some.
I guess. I mean, look, if it's somebody, if it's somebody just curious and, harmless, it's all good. I mean, if somebody starts to, hurl invectives or something like that, then yeah, then kick them out.
But it'll show something that says disconnect them or something.
Yeah, there's a way to do that. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a way to kick them, kick them out. So yeah. All right. So let's jump in real quick. Let me get you going here. Uh, okay. I feel like 108 was where, yeah, we were talking about praying by mistake. Let me see how far we got in that and whether we need to go farther. I think we covered a good number of these things, but let me make sure. Um, I think, yeah, let's go on to 109. I think we kind of get the basic idea about what it means to make up for, you know, a lost opportunity to say the Amida. I think we basically got that. So obviously we can always, go back to that if we need, but I think we can keep going. Um, so these are matters of, it says, how an individual conducts themselves in order to focus their prayer together with the congregation. So this is something that I think is, I don't know if it's unique to Judaism, but certainly it's, very much a part of our prayer service. In other words, that you have the congregational service, right? That goes at a certain rate according to the leader of the congregation. And then apart from that, there is everybody's responsibility to pray. And to say certain, to fulfill certain obligations in terms of prayer. I don't know whether there is a parallel in other religions. In other words, I don't know whether in a church service, if you show up late to church, do you have to catch up, or do you just go in and whatever hymn they're saying, you join in? So if anybody knows more about this, I'm happy to, entertain that. But my sense is that this is a somewhat uniquely Jewish dual responsibility. So in other words, there's what the congregation does, and then there's what we do. Now, in an ideal world, we are completely in sync with each other, right? In an ideal world, everybody is starting at the same time, full of concentration and participation, and doing exactly as the service, is going. And then at the end of it, you're ending at the same time too. That's the ideal world. The world, of course, is not an ideal, and and there are many times where other circumstances prevail for various reasons.
But I think in the church, I only can speak for like the Protestant church types. I don't know much about the Catholic Church, but my memory is that you really need to be there at the beginning.
Yeah.
They don't like it when you come in late. It's considered rude. And so I don't know, that may have changed. It may be different in America than it was in Europe. But in Europe, I mean, you were there before it started and in your pew. And yeah. And
Well,
then
I might have been, I was young and foolish and I went to several primarily Methodist churches. And if I was going on my own, I usually would try to just get there and have time for the sermon. But nobody ever said anything. You just kind of picked up the book and went on where they were going. And then I went once to a Catholic service because my girlfriend at the time was Catholic and asked me to go with her. And the only thing I remember about that is kneeling things in front of me on the front of the pews in front. There were patio, and I thought, well, that was nice. But other than that, I don't really remember much about it. We just And I think we were there at the beginning, but I never noticed anybody coming late. They just start and keep on going, and I guess they're happy to see somebody show up.
Sure, sure. That's, I mean, yeah, yeah, I mean, I think there are certain, like, there are different cultures when it comes to all this, and so it might depend on a particular area. Um, and that I think is, in my limited experience attending services at Reform synagogues, which, from time to time, I have, um, that very much, it very much follows that Protestant model in what Gilead described, in that you have, it's like services start when they start, and you're there, and that's what it is. You show up and on time, and that's how it goes. Um, I do find it. I mean, it's very interesting that at least for a very long time, um, if you were at synagogue at the beginning of a bar mitzvah service, typically you knew um, who the non-Jews were because they were the ones on time.
Yeah, that's right.
And it was the Jews who would saunter in, later on. Okay, like, oh, we just don't want to miss the bulk of it. A strategy that has been employed by some recent B'nai Mitzvah. I don't remember whether we said this explicitly before my daughter Eliana's bat mitzvah, but I think we kind of told some people on the side, it's like services start at 9:30, but to those who aren't particularly I mean, aren't Jewish or not familiar with Judaism, it's like, if you show up at 10, it's okay. You're not going to miss anything that Eliana does. That was sort of the impression that we, tried to communicate. So anyway, it's a uniquely Jewish and maybe uniquely Orthodox and conservative at this point way of thinking about it. Yeah.
And when you think about it, Reform Judaism is kind of modeled on classical Reform Judaism is modeled on Lutheran Christianity, right?
Absolutely.
It started in Germany, and they wanted the same decor and everything that the Lutheran Church had. Now, sure. to have the respect. So.
No, 100%. So,
well, the previous synagogue I used to attend for probably about 8 years, it's not affiliated with the conservative movement, but they use the conservative prayer book and follow everything, mainly because what it costs to do that. After I first started going, and I was out there about 8 years, I would kind of judge the time to get in time for the Torah service and the Marie service, and cut down the service to like an hour to an hour and a half, which is about as long as I wanted to go. And nothing was ever said. They didn't have a problem with it. They just kind of knew when I was going to get there. Nobody minded.
Yeah. I mean, I think it becomes a challenge. I think where I think it becomes the biggest challenge is during high holiday services, because high holiday services are, for good reason, longer than a good bit longer than your typical Shabbat service. And so if people have honors at certain times, they might say, oh, well, it's the high holidays, I don't have to show up until, whatever o'clock. And it's like, no, they had an honor 30 minutes before whatever o'clock, and we're looking for you. So that's so that could be a challenge there. All right. So yeah, please.
Going back to sort of what Gilda alluded to, my experience, the biggest difference in the service in say the synagogue or a Protestant church is in the synagogue, the prayer book, the prayers are prescribed. And if you go to a Protestant church, instead of a prayer book, you have a hymnal.
Okay.
So that's sort of the songs are, but the prayers are all extemporaneous. They're not, for the most part, they're not prescribed. They're not written down. They're not.
So would it be that from time to time, whoever was leading would say, oh, well, turn to this page in the hymnal, or, this particular passage in the hymnal feels particularly relevant today, or something along those lines?
Well, most of that I think is probably worked out beforehand. The service is because you'll get a printed, like a bulletin, a pamphlet that says, here's the order of service. But in terms of like different people praying, it's typically the only person who's going to pray out loud is going to be the person who's in charge of the service, the minister.
Okay.
Everybody else would pray silently, but there's nothing written down that says, here's your prayer.
Yeah, that's the way I remember it. Yeah, because like Richard's saying, it's just a hymn book. There's no prayer book. And there's a few that everybody is supposed to have, well, not test memorize it, knows they might say together, but there's no prayer book to read from. It's just, they tell you, either a handout or usually it's just the minister telling you what page turn sets and sets in the hymnal, and that's not prayer books.
Yeah.
But you get music in your hymnal, which we don't get in our prayer book. We don't get any music.
Right, because that's really all the hymnal is songs.
Right.
Interesting. There was actually a time, where, at least in some communities, that the Haftarah, the portion from the prophets, was whatever the person given the honor to chant the Haftarah wanted to chant, as long as it was from the prophets. So in other words, you would have circumstances where, the person who's, was asked to do the Haftarah, it's like, so they come up and they would say, all right, well, today I want to talk about, today it's particularly relevant to talk about, let's say, repentance. So they would say, all right, I'm going to chant from this prophet who talked about repentance. Or, another time it maybe about, let's talk about, devotion to God. Okay, well, this prophet talked about devotion to God. I mean, whatever it might be, like they literally had a choice in what they wanted to chant on any particular day. Now we have a circumstance where Haftarot are generally, prescribed. But even then, there have been some interesting, moves along that, which is something. I mean, I know it's a little far afield, but I can talk about that at some point. So, all right, well, let's get into this real quick, and then maybe I'll talk a little bit about Haftarah too, because I find that very interesting how all that develops. All right, so the first one is one who enters the synagogue and finds the congregation praying, right? If one is able to start and finish one's recitation of the Amidah before the prayer leader arrives, arrives at Kedusha, the third blessing of the Amidah, or Kaddish, one should pray. So let's say you have a prayer leader who's taking their gosh darn time. They're like, really? And you can just sort of, kind of get through your recitation before they get to the Kedusha. Now, here's the thing about the Kedusha. The Kedusha is something where I would say, in terms of peak attentiveness, I think the Kedusha is right up there. Meaning, like, if you're going to be in sync with everybody else, the Kedusha is the prime time to do it. Part of it is because of the importance of talking about God's holiness. Part of it is also the importance of talking about it's, the Kedusha is in many ways a reenactment of sorts of the vision of Isaiah in chapter 6, where he's looking at the angels, and the angels are going, Kadosh, 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 Adonai Tzvaot, Meloch Haaretz Kivodo, that they're surrounding God, and they're doing, in other words, there is a clear communal aspect to the Kedusha. And so if everybody's going to be on the same page, literally and figuratively, at any point in the service, that's the time to do it. So the thought is, okay, if you can get your Amidah done before the leader goes to the Kedusha, go for it. Now, when it says Kaddish, that one, I'm a little like whether they're talking about Kaddish Shalem, the Kaddish, that usually follows an Amidah, or maybe not immediately, but eventually. That maybe is sort of another threshold to try to be on the same page as the leader. So the gloss we have is, this is also the ruling for answering Amen to the blessings of the Holy One, meaning Baruch Atah Adonai Ha'el HaKadosh, which is the blessing formula at the end of the Kedusha. And also, who hears prayer? Baruch Atah Adonai Shomea Tefillah. At the end of the third to last blessing of the Amidah, their law is like Kaddish and Kedusha. And then you have like the sources for that. So you may have circumstances where the leader is repeating the Amidah after everyone has said it quietly. Okay, so you get there a little late and you're catching up, and you have to say you have to fulfill your obligation of saying the Amidah. Try to get it in, if you can, within these particular stopping points, because it is ideal to be able to say Amen when the leader gets to those milestones, if you will. So that's the ideal that we're looking at here. Now, if not, the Shulchan Aruch goes on, one should not pray as long as the time for praying the Amidah has not yet passed. In other words, if you're saying to yourself, okay, I'm not going to be able to get my Amidah done before the leader does the Kedusha, as long as you are within the halachically acceptable time frame to say the Amidah, then just wait until after you get to those checkpoints. Does everybody follow what I'm talking about? Is anything unclear? Right. I just want to make sure. Okay. Now, here's another checkpoint that they mentioned. If one is able to start and finish one's Amidah before the prayer leader arrives at Modim, Modim is the prayer that speaks of our thanking God, one should pray, and if not, one should not pray. And this is the ruling if, as long as one is able to arrive at Modim, or one of the other blessings in which one bows, when the prayer leader arrives at Modim, one should pray. Um, I think what's going on there is this understanding that if we're praying, if we're busy praying the Amidah and everybody else in the congregation is bowing, that doesn't look good. Or not that it's rude, but that it's, the idea is that, all right, when we bow, we should try to be able to bow all together. Or if you're doing your own thing, it kind of sticks out like a sore thumb, I guess. Does that make sense? Okay. And if one needs to begin praying the Amidah, in order to juxtapose Ge'ulah, the blessing of redemption that immediately precedes the Amidah, to the Amidah prayer, and it happens that the prayer leader reaches Modim when one is in the middle of one of the Amidah blessings, one should bow with the prayer leader. Okay. If you'll give me a moment, I want to switch this because there's a lot going on there. I'm going to switch this. I'm going to share a different document. I want to show, let's see. Give me a moment, if you would, to take a screenshot of something, and I want to explain what exactly is going on, because there's a lot to that. Okay. Okay. Sorry. Thank you for your patience here, because I just want to be able to explain this as well as I can. Okay. Thanks for your patience. Let me show this photograph, this screenshot I just took. Now, granted, this screenshot is not from the Siddur that we currently use at Hesed Emunah, but it's one of the ones that came relatively that was after that, or one of the ones that was before that. So, but you may recognize some of these prayers. So, at a Shachrit service, a morning service, when we're getting close to the Amidah, there are passages that go like this. You may have heard people going, Mi chamocha ba'elim Adonai, mi chamocha nedar ba'kodesh, nora tehilodo sefele, etc., etc. And then a little bit lower down, you see in the bold, Adonai imloch leolam va'ed. It goes, and then usually the congregation rises, Sur Yisrael, Kuma Be'ezrat Yisrael, etc. And then at the end of the paragraph, the last Hebrew line that we have here is Baruch Atah Adonai Ga'al Yisrael. Blessed are you, Adonai, who redeems Israel. Now, what's important about that? Beyond the idea of just praying for redemption is a pretty common thing that we do. But what's also going on is that in a morning service, it was determined a long time ago that you go straight from saying those words to going into the Amidah. In other words, when you say the Amidah, you're not supposed to take a break just before the Amidah. There are those who have the practice. I honestly don't, I can't say that I do this often, but sometimes I do. I try to remember when I do that before we get to this part of the Shachrit service, I announce, okay, in a couple of moments, we're going to get to the Amidah, so that I don't announce the page between this last blessing, Ga'al Yisrael, and the Amidah, because the idea is that we're supposed to go straight from the idea of redemption into the recitation of the Amidah. Is everybody following? Does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. I'm
Okay.
always a little bit stumped exactly how early I should be announcing those pages, rather than doing it at the end. And Michael does it. He does it very consistently, like a few paragraphs before.
Yeah, I have to say I often forget, which
Well, I
is
do too. So, and sometimes I think it's too early, and then I don't do it until the very end.
right,
I
and
violate the rule of not interrupting in between.
yeah, it's and I don't know. I mean, to me, I understand the look. I understand. I mean, I understand the idea. It's there's a nice idea behind it, but I also feel that I have a responsibility as somebody who, if they're calling pages, if they're announcing pages, to um, that it's important to also direct people to do, to say prayers in the right place in the right time. So I think of all, I mean, this is not, I think making an announcement between saying Ga'al Yisrael and the Amidah, I wouldn't call it a faux pas. Maybe a peccadillo, but not like a major. Oh my gosh, I can't believe you did that.
Sort of in general, though, does this mean that if you're going to come to uh, your synagogue, either be on time or don't come at all?
So it's not. No, it's not quite that. I understand what you mean, but it's it's sort of like, all right, there's this idea of uh what's ideal, and then is what we can live with. And there are actually like Talmudic phrases that differentiate between between what is ideal and what we can live with if we're not reaching the ideal. So, I'm trying to think of a good example of that. Um, I mean, here's like a kind of a large example. It is ideal, if possible, to attend synagogue and pray with a minyan, to pray with a quorum, and to be in community. But if there are circumstances preventing that, whatever they may be, better than, okay, at least if you're praying on your own, at least you're doing that. In other words, it's not the ideal we should strive for, but it's better than nothing. It's better than not doing it at all. So, sorry, real quick, because another example that might be a little more relevant to what we've been talking about in recent weeks. If the ideal is to pray the morning service in the morning, but if circumstances prevent that, whatever they may be, if you have to say the morning prayers when it's afternoon, better than nothing.
Yeah, but you're talking about the individual. I'm talking about the rabbi and the specific congregation. That maybe that's best for you, better late than never. But maybe the rabbi and the congregation don't like it if you're not going by the rules.
Yeah. I mean, the most we can do is encourage. The most we can do. I mean, yeah, obviously we have to whenever possible. Uh, yeah, I mean, we have to look, we have to, follow rules as best we can. And, but,
But
you
you're
know,
being nice again. All I'm asking is this aggravating you as a rabbi in the congregation as a whole if you
does
come
that,
in late?
does it aggravate me?
Yeah.
Not usually, not usually. Here's what aggravates me. I will acknowledge this, and here, if you want to get into a quick pet peeve, uh, and please understand, I'm not. I mean, this is not a. I'm not pinpointing anyone in particular in the congregation, obviously, but when people arrive late, um, that usually doesn't bother me. It bothers me if somebody is arriving late and um, making a lot of noise. Meaning, I have been in again. This is not a Heskamuna comments, but I have been in circumstances where people have walked in, and it's like, then half a dozen people stand up going, "Oh, hello, how's it going?" I mean, like, and there's all of a sudden there's like a whole ruckus going on in one part of the sanctuary. That's not great. I mean, and look, and there, and it's something that can be done subtly. If you're not walking in on time, it's okay to, a handshake, a hug. I mean, like, I mean, you can do it in a relatively quiet, reasonably unobtrusive way. Some people are not attuned to that. I'll just put it that way.
Well,
So,
that's, reasonable, not being rude, regardless of what you're doing. But
yeah.
could you answer for the congregation? Because I think she's probably past president and a whole bunch of stuff in the board, so she probably can speak pretty much for the synagogue, can't she?
I mean, yeah, I mean, I think you can, I mean, I think we need to, we can encourage. Okay, I'll say here's what irritates me. What irritates me is when um, somebody comes to services maybe about like 20 minutes before the service ends, if that, and then has no problem enjoying having a very full plate at Kiddush.
Yeah, you're all talking about common sense, but what does Gilder say to the Heskin Mother's viewpoint of that? Nobody's ever blocked the door if I came in late, said you can't go in.
Right. No, no, no,
Late.
no. Again,
What does the congregation and the board probably think about that? Rather you just not coming up.
Gail, you want to throw one
I
up in
just
there?
wanted to say for some people, that's the way to go, to come late and come for the Kiddush really, and not for services. And, what can you do? I mean,
Right. Yeah, I think that's what we're getting. Like, at the end of the day, what can you do? And at the end of the day, you got to be able to um, be. What are we trying to do as a congregation, right? What is a congregation trying to do in general? The congregation has, as the rabbis teach, three main functions. It is to be a house of prayer, it is to be a house of study, and it is to be a house of gathering. So, um, uh, you know, I feel a responsibility as the rabbi to help protect the sanctity and the importance of the prayer service. I mean, I feel like that's an important part of my job. But yeah, I mean, you're not okay. You're not. I should be a little more. I should be a little more specific. If somebody comes 20 minutes before the end of services, again, we don't lock the doors. We're happy to have you, and yes, please do, be a part of our community in one way or the other. I will tell you one thing. Again, this is not at Heskamuna. Somebody showed up 15 minutes before services ended, ate a kiddush, and had brought a cooler to grab leftovers, that's chutzpah. I mean, that is chutzpah. I look, and listen, I don't know. I didn't know whether, like, okay, were they food insecure, right? Were they, it's like, if that's the case, then I think there are more subtle ways to do it. It's like, you inform somebody, slips you a little something, to help, that's fine. But it's like, hi, I'm here to just clean up, that was just way too tacky. So I don't know. Yeah. Somebody always, the way somebody puts it when it comes to when services begin and when they end, somebody's saying, oh, well, services begin too early, so services are too long. At the end, services are as long as you make them, meaning you don't want to be there from 9:45 to noon, for instance. No one's, again, stopping you from coming at 10:15. No one's stopping you from coming at 11:15. And there is a certain point, though, where we do need at least a decent group at a certain point in the service, like when especially during the Torah service, like we need, and this is in circumstances where, let's say, you're in communities a good deal smaller than Knoxville. Where my very first student pulpit was in Watertown, New York. Almost Canada, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Tiny
Fort
place,
Drum.
tiny synagogue. Fort Drum, exactly. Where Fort Drum is. And lovely people, but there was one time where it was Simchat Torah morning, and we had 9 people. And so it's like we couldn't do most of Simchat Torah, most of the stuff. A 10th person walked in at Adon Olam.
No, that's sad.
And it's like, and you kind of sit there going, I mean, like, on one hand, again, look, it was nice to see them. Like, it's like, like, this is a nice person. I wasn't, but I'm kind of sitting there going, couldn't you have just come a little earlier? Like, I mean, it's, so I think it's especially relevant where, getting a minyan for a Shabbat or a holiday morning is a lot more tenuous.
Right.
Right. Shabbat mornings, at least from what I've seen at Heskamuna, we usually get a minyan. I mean, like, that's not usually a problem. Holiday week, like when major holidays fall on weekdays, then it might be a little more touch and go. So that's where, we try to just, send out messages. Hey, if you can make it, we'd really, really appreciate, and if you could be there at a reasonable time, or at a time that at least is not so late, so that we can do a Torah service. We can do, parts of the service that people really appreciate in general, that are really at the heart of things.
How do you feel about taking out the Torah for the 10th person?
So this is a great question. How do I feel about taking out the Torah for a 10th person? So let me explain.
I'm sorry, I couldn't what was the question? I didn't get the
No,
question.
yeah, no, it's okay. So how do I feel about taking out the Torah as the 10th person? Let me explain what this is.
Okay, I got it. I just couldn't understand the.
But in case somebody's watching on YouTube and doesn't know what we're talking about, I'll kind of back up. There have been some who have held by the position that if there are 9 Jewish adults in the room, that you can take a Torah scroll out of the ark and count that as if that is a 10th person and say that, okay, now we have a minion. Okay. I am in almost all circumstances against that practice.
I
And I
figured.
want, yeah, and I want to, but I want to explain why. Because there are times where it breaks my heart that I can't be more lenient on it. Where it's unfortunate that it has to be like that. Because you know, it's one thing to not be able to read from the Torah and to not be able to do parts of the service. It's another thing when somebody wants to say Kaddish and they can't. That's hard.
Yeah.
I fully acknowledge that. My sense is that that practice only came into being in cases at a time when, you know, where you were in where Jewish communities were more remote from one another. All right, this is before the car, before the airplane, before et cetera, and where, you know, and if you were isolated, if you were far away, like it's like where it really was almost impossible to get 9 Jewish adults. Well, probably in those times it had to be 9 Jewish men, but okay, but nine Jewish adults. Or like it was really difficult to get a 10th. It was really tough to do it, and it's not like you could just call in reinforcements at a moment's notice. So in that circumstance, I could understand that if you're remote. And so how would that play into modern times? I would say if you're at a camp, like if you're at a camp and, you know, it's like, all right, you're in a rural area where, let's be honest, usually there are not a lot of other adult Jews kind of, you know, hanging around. You know, you can't just sort of, you know, go out and look for Jews all that often in such circumstances. So that in that case, I would respect that argument. But other than that, and I think, I mean, and Knoxville, I know Knoxville's not a huge Jewish community, but there are Jews in Knoxville. There are, and we know some of them, you know, and so I don't think it holds up. Now, the question then comes up, okay, but Rabbi, what's the harm? What's the harm, really? Okay, let me explain what I think the harm could potentially be. To me, the requirement of having 10 for a minyan is one of the key, like it's one of the it's part of it, it's I think maybe the glue that keeps communal Judaism alive. I know that might sound like a very broad statement, but the reason why is, okay, so you're in a synagogue on a random day, you say, okay, well, all right, there are 9 Jewish adults. Let's take out the Torah and you know, and make a 10th. Okay. The next time there are going to be 8 Jewish adults. Let's take out 2 Torah scrolls. Right? Because have a heart, right? Somebody wants to say Kaddish. Again, I'm sympathetic, but it's like, all right, what's stopping somebody from saying, all right, it's going to be, you know, we have 6 and we have 4 Torah scrolls. Like, I mean, that to me, that is, I mean, slippery slope arguments don't always hold water. This is one that I really think does. Where
Well, I misunderstood the question, and my question would be, what if you missed the part where you needed 10, and then somebody walks in and either you do or you don't know if they're Jewish? Do you back up? And if you don't have to back up, nobody's ever going to give me 20 questions at the door. So how do you know what to do?
So yeah, that can be complicated. I know, like, so I think Richard, you and I talked about this at some point because
Mhm.
Richard, as you're as you are continuing on your journey toward this, that there may be times where there are 9 Jewish adults and then there's you, and people will say, "Oh, well, we have a minyan," and I'm like, "Oh, no, we don't," and and it's like we don't at the moment, and and we're not trying to point fingers at you, making you feel bad about
Right,
anything, because
right.
and by the way, whether or not you were studying for conversion, just if you were there,
Hmm.
it's like, okay, like it's not, you're just, you're just there, and we're
Right.
happy to have you. So anyway, um, so yeah, how do you do that in a polite way, right? How do you, determine that? It is, I think there have been times where I've been in a circumstance where it's like I'd like kind of amble up to them and say, you know, just want to ask. I don't mean to be, apologize. Like, I don't mean, I'm sorry if this is intrusive. I just, there are certain rules of what we can say, what we can't say if we have, so just wondering if you are Jewish. Now, what I do is if I is that in circumstances like that, if they say they're Jewish, I take them at their word. Unless
Well,
I
right here on the pulpit, you're not going to run down. And I mean, I could have visited there before you were ever knew anything about me, and there's people in your synagogue is known, since I came back in '79, and they probably not everybody, but there's plenty in there to know that I'm Jewish, but I haven't, they didn't run up the pulpit or you do hand signals or something. So what do? You're stuck on the pulpit.
Yeah, sometimes there are people who, there honestly, there have been times where I've kind of snuck down if I needed to. But there are other times where there will be somebody, who kind of is sort of like, kind of like he's like, all right, Rabbi, I got you. I'll ask. I'll let you know if there's, I'll give you a thumbs up, assuming that
Hmm.
it, or whatever it is, or if it, they're not going to give a thumbs down and just, who's this guy? Then he's not going to do that.
And
But
what about the other part of the question? And you missed something or you just finished something, particularly the Torah, when
yeah,
you need 10 and 2 minutes after somebody walks in, it's that's just simple that you recognize it. Well, now I got 10. What are you going to do? Do you back up? You just keep going.
so it honestly, it depends on the timing. It's fair. It entirely depends on the timing. So, um, in the circumstance that I described on a Simchat Torah morning, to back up and say, all right, now we're going to do all of Simchat Torah again, that would have been another hour. And to then have everybody say, okay, we really would really appreciate it if none of you leave for the next hour, when they were like, look, we're going on with our day, that would be a bit much. So it depends on what you're trying to do. I have been in circumstances where like a 10th person has walked in just after there was an opportunity to say mourner's Kaddish. And then what I would do is like, okay, where I'll go back and I'll recite we'll recite one of the Psalms, and then add a Kaddish, maybe not a mourner's Kaddish, but sometimes I've done the Kaddish de Rabbanan, which is a legitimate Kaddish, it's the Kaddish it's the scholar's Kaddish, and it's when you learn any bit of Torah. So even if you weren't comfortable saying, oh, well, the psalm really isn't part of the service, we're kind of cheating. If you are saying Kaddish de Rabbanan, though, that's not cheating. That's Kaddish de Rabbanan is when you're doing any kind of learning. So that's not a shortcut. So there are times where I will do something like that, where it's like, all right, well, okay, now somebody can actually say a Kaddish. Let's at least do that. Um, uh, in so I think it depends on how much needs to be done in the service and how much people are able to stick around. Because especially if you're dealing with like where you have exactly 10, there's no margin for error. And, so there have been times where we've gotten a 10th and I look around, it's like, okay, well, are people able to stay? And if somebody says, like, I mean, there's been a weekday morning service where like, can you guys stay? And this one person said, I have a doctor's appointment. I'm like, okay, you got a doctor's appointment. And you scheduled it after Minion was scheduled to end. Like you did all the right things. You got a doctor's appointment. You got to do it. I mean, so I'll say, all right, well, we did that. We did our best.
Well, you've covered the morning's cause, but what about the Torah, reading the Torah? How much
Reading the
has
Torah.
to be done before that?
So, so there are a lot of different scenarios on that. Like, so here's the thing. There are also questions of, all right, if you have a minion and then you lose it. All right. So for instance, there's a Torah reading and you started the Torah reading. Like, let's say, there's, 7 aliyot, and around aliyah 2, somebody's like, I have to go for whatever reason. I got to go. And now you don't have a minion. Because you started it, you're allowed to finish as if there were still a minion in the room. As long as you started it, that particular unit, you're okay finishing.
So only that aliyah. You can't go any further then?
I actually tend to be a little more relaxed on that.
Okay.
I actually tend to say that, like, it's like, to me, it's sort of like, I look at Torah reading in general as sort of a unit.
Right.
But let's say it's a day where you read Torah and then you say the Musaf service. I would not then say, oh, well, we can do Musaf. We can, do like the Musaf Amidah out loud, or we can do the Kaddish at the end. So, like, we wouldn't. Like, in other words, we finished the Torah reading in full, and then, I'll give maybe one more example and then I'll let everybody go for the day, which is that this absolutely came up during COVID, where we had people sign up for services, and it's like, and we had exactly 10 people sign up for services because everybody was sitting in different pods and all that sort of thing, and and so we're like, okay, all right, well, we got 10 for the Saturday morning service. We should be able to do a full service, right? And waiting for, and so that 3 of the people who showed up were all like a mother, father, and teenage child. And the father comes up to me when they arrive and they said, yeah, sorry, she slept in. She didn't want to, we couldn't get her to come to synagogue. I'm like, yeah, okay. It's like, thanks for trying. I mean, what can you do, right? Yeah. But I'll close with this thought. Having, whether 10 was always the right number or the wrong number, it's the number we have. And I think we need to stick with it, because if we start to, get wishy-washy on that, then there are times where people might say, well, all right, well, they don't need me for the minion. Why would I come to synagogue? Or they use that as an excuse. All right, they don't need me. And there goes the impetus for some people to come to synagogue.
That's what they said too, though, before women had before we were equal. So they would say, no, if women can be counted, then the men won't come anymore. But the men are still coming.
They're still coming, and as we should. So, all right. So we will. We'll to be continued next week.
All right.
So
Yes,
Brooks, I appreciate the discussion, the question.